So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Brian MacNeice. Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Hi, Adrian. How are you?
Very well, sir. So, Brian is the managing director of Continuous Partners and also co-author with James Bowen of a new book called Powerhouse: Insider Accounts into the World's Top High-Performance Organizations. So, before we jump into the book, Brian, first of all, congratulations on the book. But can you give us a little bit of a background for the benefit of our listeners and readers on who you are and the sort of work that you do? And also tell them about the rugby as well, because we were just talking about
that. I'll get on to the rugby in a minute. Yeah. So, from a work point of view, so both myself and James, my co-author, we run a business called Continuous Partners.
Oh, apologies for the mispronunciation.
No, that's okay. It's quite all right. We're based in Dublin, Ireland, but we work on an international basis with clients trying to help them improve their business performance. So fundamentally, our business is about working with managers and organizations to improve organizational performance.
Right.
We kind of do that through a kind of variety of different interventions primarily around strategy, prioritization, team dynamics, working on kind of process stuff as well in relation to helping drive consistent, long-term, sustainable organizational performance.
Okay.
The rugby stuff that you've referred to, and so my pastime, my hobby is I'm a rugby referee for my sins. So I officiate in various different levels of rugby, including the professional game in the Pro 12 and elsewhere. Unfortunately, talking to a Scotsman is not a good thing after Scotland have just turned Ireland over. So we might move past the rugby pretty quickly.
It hasn't happened for a while, so I'm going to take this moment. Yeah.
We'll give you this one. We'll let you wallow on this one.
Thank you. Now so as I mentioned, you recently published a book with James. It's called Powerhouse. So can you tell us a little bit more about the book and how it came about, central thesis, and so on, who's it for and what's its purpose, etc., just to give us a bit of context?
Yeah, so the general idea behind the book, we've been working on this stuff for quite a while. It's related to the work that we do with our clients. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly asking the question, how do you go about getting organizations to, in a sustainable way, improve their performance over time?
Right.
And so in order underneath the skin of that a little bit more, we decided to research what we regarded as some of the best organizations in the world. Mm-hmm. And by best organizations in the world, we define that as organizations that have been outperforming their peers for a long period of time, decades in most cases.
Okay.
And we also decided that we wanted to make it quite diverse. So we wanted to test the theory that any organization could be great, that it's not kind of geographically dependent and it's not sectoral dependent. So we obviously looked at business organizations like Toyota in Japan, like Tata in India, like Southwest Airlines in the US.
Yeah.
But we also looked outside of business into sport, for example. So I lent on some of my contacts in rugby and we studied the New Zealand All Black Rugby team, the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team.
Right.
We studied music institutions like the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia and the Kirov Ballet in Russia.
Wow, okay.
The Finnish state school education system, which is one of the best in the world. And we even went into healthcare in places like the Mayo Clinic and Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières, as it would be known in Europe, the humanitarian aid agency. U.S. Marine Corps as well. So a real diverse range of organizations that we looked at to say, well, these are all organizations that outperform their peers. What is it that is common across all of them? Is there a difference between these organizations, those that manage long-term sustained high performance and the others? And if there is, what are those differences? And what are the characteristics that these organizations share, so that we can learn from that and use that in the work that we do with the clients that we work with, and trying to deliver similar outcomes for our client base.
Okay.
So that was the basic kind of central thesis of the book and the kind of rationale for doing it in the first place.
Excellent. I mean, some of the names are fantastic. I mean, I also kind of know there's another one there. I think Grameen Bank is in the mix as well.
Yeah.
It's an organisation which I've watched with admiration and fondness for what they're doing. Mohammed Yunus over there is the guy's a legend.
Yeah, incredible human being, and we had the honor of meeting him. He was very, very generous with his time for us because we visited him in Bangladesh.
Wow. Okay.
So for those that aren't aware, the Grameen Bank, it's a corporate entity, so it's a profit-making organization, but it is essentially the founding father of the microloan industry. So the Grameen lend small amounts of money to people below the poverty line or kind of assetless people, and use that to try and affect change in their lives. It's the only corporate entity to this day that's won the Nobel Peace Prize, and a very, very inspirational story. But yes, the bulk of the principles of how Grameen's success has what it's founded on are very similar to what we found in all of the other organizations that we studied for the book. So. Yeah. Fascinating story, and it's the one that we start with actually in the book. So, it's one of my favorite ones. You're not allowed to have a favorite child, but when it comes to the case studies, that's one of my favorite ones.
I mean, I've seen them I've watched them for a while, and I think it's one of the things that's fascinating about them is because they do this micro lending, as you say, to assetless people that are on or below the poverty line, and it's trying to help them build micro enterprises so they can make their own living, and so on and so forth. But there's a peer-based accountability element to it, but then which so there's like a support network, almost like a local support network, but then they end up with kind of loan default rates which are the envy of pretty much any bank anywhere in the world, though, because of the how it's all structured.
Yeah, pretty much every dollar that they lend out, they get back. So with interest. So they've got a loan recovery rate of in excess of 98%. Now, as you say, any financial institution in the world would kill for a loan recovery rate that high, particularly in the current circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but when you kind of had all these 12 in-depth kind of case studies, which are extremely diverse, I mean, what you've been able to do is you've sort of pulled out all these 12 what you call powerhouse principles.
Yeah.
Was it ambition, purpose, measure, standards, gap, decisions, code, engagement, resilience, feedback, teamwork, and improvement? A lot of them. So, can you? Before I don't want to go through all of them, sort of thing. But can you tell me about the principles and how did they come about? I mean, did they just emerge? And also then tell me about a couple of them. I mean, things like, because I'm very interested in things like service and experience and engagement and so on and so forth. So it'd be useful if you could tell me about a couple of them that are related to those sort of areas.
Yeah, sure. So if I take the first part of that question,
sure.
How did we land on the principles that we landed on? I guess as we started to carry out the studies in detail and really reflect on what were some of the characteristics that we felt drove the sustained level of high performance in each of the institutions that we studied, we spotted repeating patterns. So we started to kind of talk through what those repeated patterns look like, and really use them as a mechanism for trying to understand. Well, these are essentially this is the what, if you like, of sustained high performance. These are the core principles that underpin high performance in the examples that we looked at, and we started to see them manifest themselves, obviously in slightly different ways in each case study, but the core principles were exactly the same.
Right.
So let me talk about two of them to bring it to life. So if we take the first one, I would talk about would be ambition.
Right.
So what we have learned from high-performing organizations is that there is a kind of a fundamental principle of ambition that's at the heart of what they do. So if we take the Grameen Bank that we've just been talking about,
sure.
Mohammed Yunus, when he set up the Grameen Bank, set it up to try and use access to credit as a mechanism for effectively eliminating poverty for a large bunch of people in Bangladesh. And by setting out to it, with that ambition, he articulated it as he wanted to create a museum of poverty. In other words, poverty would be a thing of the past, which is a fairly kind of ambitious goal, I think we can agree. But by setting it in that way, it forced him to think about doing things in a different way. So the one thing he was sure about, if we continue to operate the way we are currently, then we're not going to achieve the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. In other words, if we deny access to credit for people who are below the poverty line, then we won't provide them with the ability to be able to get themselves out of poverty.
Yeah.
So it forced them to make the first big decision, which was, we're going to give money to people who most people in existing financial institutions would say can't afford to pay us back.
Yeah.
We're going to lend that money on the basis of a commercial loan. This is not a charity we're setting up, and so we want this to sustain itself. So we're going to expect it to be paid back. Mm-hmm. We're going to lend exclusively to women rather than men. And again, the reason he did that was because women were excluded from the financial system.
Right.
And he felt that if our goal is to try and get people out of poverty, that the money that we lend families will be more responsibly used if it's in the hands of the women, the matriarch in the family, rather than if it's with the males.
Right.
And then the final thing was, we're going to set up a whole bunch of decisions that people make, almost the terms and conditions that go with the loan. They're now called the 16 decisions that Grameen borrowers buy into when they accept a loan. And they are things that are going to affect real change in their family situation. So if I've got school-age children, they'll go to school. We'll have a damp-proof roof over our house. We'll serve 3 meals a day.
Right.
We won't engage in dairy, the process of dairies at weddings, things like that.
Right.
That are going to fundamentally change. Now, all of those things happened because he took on the ambition in the first instance.
Yes.
Without the ambition as the driving force for doing things differently, all of the innovation that came after that just simply wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And when we started to look at that across all the other organizations, we started to see the same thing happening again and again and again. So when we went to Finland, we saw the ambition in Finland was to give everybody the same high level of education.
Right.
And once you start from that ambitious viewpoint, you then start breaking some of the traditional rules around, well, in order to achieve that, maybe we've got to do things slightly differently. So we saw that notion of ambition just repeated across all the organizations. And that's why it then became a foundational principle of high performance for us.
That's fascinating, because actually kind of you say you set the ambition and then you focus on the outcomes. And then it's like, it's not about, there is no prerequisite of this is how we're going to do things. It almost like the shackles are off then, aren't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it actually forces kind of innovative thinking into the system, and it also forces a different kind of order of engagement, or level of engagement, if you like, around how we deliver that. Yes. Again, fundamentally, without that ambition in the first instance, it just isn't there. And so that's why it's helpful. That's why it works. And that's why we use that as a starting point in many occasions with the teams that we work with. Yeah. To try and kind of work towards that sustainable level of organizational high performance.
Okay. And so is there other kind of like, I mean, because like I said before, so I'm interested in, like I describe myself as being somebody who's a fan of organizations who do great things for their customers and their people. And the one that kind of like stood out for me was that is engagement. Because engagement's this big word that floats around and has lots of meaning attached to it and things. But can you talk to me about that one and kind of what you found out and what it kind of has meant within this context?
Yeah. So what we found, unsurprisingly, is that organizations that really embrace engagement, and by engagement we're talking, as you've just mentioned, not just about staff engagement, but customer engagement, stakeholder engagement, supplier engagement, etc. The organizations that get this really right in a very authentic way, we refer to engagement as a contact sport. It's something that you've really, to engage. To have a high level of engagement, you've really got to engage. Yes. So again, to give you a couple of examples, so I just finished talking about the Finnish state school education system. Yeah. So in order to understand how that worked, we went to Finland and we got access to a number of state schools. And as we were walking around the schools, I was learning stuff all the time. So I remember one day I was walking, it was a high school. I walked into a class of 9-year-olds who were studying maths.
Yeah.
But as we were walking into the classroom, there were 2 kids in the corridor, sitting at a desk in the corridor, working away.
Right.
And we went in. I had a chat with the maths teacher. We watched them kind of working away in the class, and we walked away. I was with the headmaster of the school at the time, and as we were walking away, I asked him, "What did the 2 kids in the corridor do wrong?" And he kind of looked at me very puzzled and laughed. And goes, "Why do you think they did something wrong?" And I said, "Well, certainly in my experience, the only time you were ever in a corridor during a lesson was when you were put out by the teacher for having done something wrong." And he found this concept just hilarious. And he said, "No, the reason that those 2 kids are out there is they're in a maths class. They're problem solving at the moment, and those 2 kids like to debate and discuss and talk out the problem with somebody,
right?
And sometimes that disrupts the other students in the class. So when they're in problem solving mode, they move into the corridor so that they're able to have that discussion and debate."
Right.
And I felt very foolish. I thought, of course, that makes entire sense. And I said, obviously the teacher is very enlightened to set them up in this way. And he said, no, the kids decide that themselves.
Right.
And so what it brought home to me was this notion of engaging with kids around how they the whole education process.
Yeah.
So that you understand and they understand how they best learn and how they best problem solve, and then build a system to enable them to do that in exactly the way that is most comfortable for them. Mm-hmm. And so 2 things I came away with. One, the ability of a system to allow 9-year-olds to determine how best they learn and enable that, and the confidence of the teachers to set it up in that way. And for me, that's an example of engagement at a deeper level, where you're really understanding, in this case, your customer, that's the student, how best to set things up to deliver the best outcome for those students.
Yeah, it feels to me like it's sort of the difference between being system-centric or human or employee or customer sort of centric.
Yeah. And so what we found, again, unsurprisingly, is that when we looked across the various different organizations and institutions that we studied, we kept seeing this over and over again.
Right.
So in the Mayo Clinic, it's all about the patient need right at the heart. And every hospital will tell you that. But actually, every process in the Mayo Clinic is designed accordingly to reinforce that principle.
Yes.
In the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, not the biggest city in America in baseball terms, but yet they have the 2nd largest attendance. And when you look at it, why? Because they engage with fans in a way that's much deeper and more personal, and delivers a completely different experience in their stadium in comparison to any other stadium that you walk into in the States. Right. And so you start seeing this notion of engagement becoming really, really important in driving performance. And the big lesson for me, we've got lots of clients who are worried about engagement, whether it's staff engagement or customer engagement, invest huge amounts of money in it. For me, they're not always investing in the right thing. Mm-hmm. I think they need to invest in engagement programs that enable performance, as opposed to engagement programs that just simply make people happy.
Yes.
So, and that's the difference for me. And that's what we saw in our case studies.
Yeah. So, I completely agree. I mean, it's like it feels to me that I saw this slightly shocking statistic which somebody said, it was reported that the employee engagement industry is worth somewhere in excess of $70 billion a year. And I'm sorry to say, I think probably most of that is kind of wasted on trying to do stuff to people to try in the interest of making them more engaged, rather than actually seeing engagement as sort of being an outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm intrigued by this notion that in order to test engagement, we're going to send people a link to an online survey to ask them a bunch of questions. Quite the opposite of actually engaging with them. If I want to know if my staff are engaged, I'll go and talk to them. I'll go look them in the eye and have a conversation. How do you feel? Do you feel engaged? What motivates you? What drives you? Really ask those questions face to face rather than do it in an impersonal way, because it's only reinforcing the lack of engagement. I totally agree with you. I have kind of very strong views about how you go about effectively driving engagement.
Yeah. So so you've got all these 12 different kind of principles, and it's like they're like ingredients in a recipe. And I think that what's interesting is that you've got this, and there's many books that don't necessarily talk about the different ingredients and don't necessarily combine them, but what you've been able to do, I think, is build also kind of a model and sort of describe how all these principles and stories build into a model that you use to help describe how another organization can achieve their own sustained performance transformation. So can you tell me a little bit about that and how that works?
Yeah, so I guess that's the whole point of the book. So the book isn't just designed to try and identify what are the core principles, what's the what, if you like, of high performance, but also to try and help you figure out how do I go about building a high performance organization in my circumstance.
Yeah.
So the how is, we describe it as our Powerhouse model, but it's built around 4 core pillars, and we call this the basis for rapid sustainable performance transformation, the Powerhouse kind of model. The 4 pillars are, the first one is around a pillar that we call plan,
right?
Setting out a medium or long-term vision for where you want to go that provides direction, stretch, purpose, and inspiration for the team or the organization that you're working with, and to define very clear strategies that are very much grounded in reality about how we get from where we are now to where we're trying to aim towards,
right?
And systemically challenging that vision and plan as we execute. So having the ambition, fine, but also the focus for how we're going to deliver against that kind of sense of ambition, and continually asking the question, are we on track, and what do we need to do in order to maintain?
Right.
So that's the kind of plan pillar, if you like. Related to that then is what we call the priorities pillar. And that's at any point in time, having a clear set of priorities right now for what we need to do today in order to enable our performance tomorrow. And that's really about aligning people to deliver performance and capability improvement at the same time. Right. Delivering today whilst planning for the future. And matching that, the work demand that we have, the operational kind of focus that we have right now, to the resource supply that we have, and also to kind of figuring out how do we kind of, keep aligned to the future vision of where we're trying to get to in terms of building individual and organizational capability as we deliver today.
Right.
So what you find is you've got a kind of almost like a quarterly cycle of continual prioritization. What is in front of us in the next quarter that's going to continue our journey. The third element is what we call the people component, the people pillar, and that's all about the behavior code and the standards against which we operate. So what does it mean to be a member of a team here? What are the behaviors that are going to sustain performance for us? How do we commit to a standard? The All Blacks talk about this notion of the standard of okay is not okay.
Right.
So how do we commit to an organizational and behavioral code, if you like, that is going to help us deliver? And this is where this gets very real. So I'm very loath to use value statements, corporate value statements, and things like that. This is much more about practical. What do we do day in, day out that's going to help us deliver?
Right.
So it's very much focused on practical behaviors.
Okay.
Articulating that, and then managing against those, and rewarding against those, and recognizing those, using those to sustain performance.
And then link to that. So, tell me if this kind of fits in with that sort of that pillar. So I spoke to an organization on this podcast some time ago. They run a series of restaurants or steakhouses called Hawksmoor, and I spoke to one of the founders, Will, and he described his business, he said, we have this motto which applies to all the people, and he said, and the motto is work hard and be nice to people.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. It's really simple, really compelling. And he says, but then we have a set of standards that we aspire to, and that drives all our behavior. So we have this. Yeah. This is how we are, and this is what we aspire to. Would that fit within that sort of frame?
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about. And what I love about that is that it's tangible and real.
Yeah.
So you can see exactly what that looks like when as soon as you walk into any one of those restaurants, you can spot the people who are working hard, the people who are kind of delivering, and delivering a really good level of service, etc.
Yeah.
It's something tangible that you can touch and feel and see and look at. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then the final pillar is what we call the process pillar. So that's how things work around here.
Right.
We absolutely buy into a philosophy of just enough process.
Right.
So we don't like over-engineered, overly bureaucratic processes, but there needs to be enough process to ensure that all the stuff that we need to get done is done in an efficient way. Yes. So by process, we're talking about organizational structure that will help sustain performance, operational processes that will help, the flow of information around the system to ensure that everybody's aligned and understands what's going on, even the physical environment and the architecture of the physical environment, making performance more transparent by putting information up around the physical work environment that helps stimulate discussion about performance and enable performance.
Sure.
So all of those supporting processes are part of the equation as well. And so
can I ask on that? Does that mean also that, because that doesn't necessarily mean so I think when you're talking about that, you're also describing almost like it can be a loose process. Like, for example, you can have an organization that's kind of populated by self-organizing teams, and they will work in a different way, but that will be their process.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So what are the supporting processes that help enable performance, and how do we make sure that we're designing those in a deliberate way that's going to be effective for what we're trying to achieve?
Right. Okay.
And so that's the model. So the four pillars, essentially we talk about the concept of working in and across those four pillars all the time as the basis for how you go about designing and sustaining a high-performing organization over a period of time. It's not about working on any one of those four pillars in isolation. It's about working in and across all four at the same time and helping use that to drive performance. So that's what we describe in the book. We kind of top and tail the book and the case studies in the book with that model and what that looks like.
Okay. So, let's say this, kind of, Brian. Somebody's listening to this and saying, right, I'm going to buy the book, I'm going to read all the case studies, I'm going to learn about all these principles, I'm going to sort of, take the model to heart, and they're saying, because I think this is something that I'm going to need in my, my firm, my organization, that they were like going, so where do I start? I mean, what would you recommend that they should do first?
Well, apart from picking up the phone or sending an email to us,
that's supposed to come at the end. Never mind.
Yeah. No, I think they need to sit down and think very carefully about what is it that we're trying to achieve in terms of going about the design, the deliberate design of a high performance organization.
Yeah.
And think against the context of those four pillars. Mm-hmm. So what is our plan? How are we going to kind of fire people up in the first instance, provide something that is meaningful and purposeful for them, but that's also based in reality of our current situation.
Yeah.
At the same time as doing that, they need to think about what are the set of priorities that are going to start us on that journey from where we are right now that we need to be focusing on today, and get clear on what those priorities are and everybody aligned behind those so that you're starting to make progress. Mm-hmm. In combination with that, you then need to build the people and the process kind of support enablers in order to sustain that too. So you've got to be clear about, well, what are the types of behaviors that we think are going to be winning behaviors, and how do we need to organize ourselves in the management of what we do so that we know that we've got a system that's just going to work. So it's about having those four conversations at the outset.
Right.
What are we trying to achieve? where do we start? What are the behaviors that are going to sustain us, and what process do we need to build around that to enable us to get there? Okay. And if you start from that point of view of thinking about having those 4 components carefully designed and architected and structured, that's the starting point for sustainable high performance. You then drive it from there.
It does also kind of find, to use a bit of a rugby analogy, it does sound like you have to pick up all 4 tackling bags and kind of like and run down the pitch with them at the same time. You can't afford to leave one behind.
Yeah, it's yeah. So this might stretch this. So if this analogy doesn't work, then let's kill it. But it's like saying, we're going to put all our energy into figuring out how to be really effective in the scrum.
Yeah.
So we're now really effective in the scrum. We win the ball, and then everybody goes, oh crikey, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Now that we have the ball, what's next?
Yeah.
So you've got to think beyond just the one item. That's why we talk about those 4 pillars and managing in and across those 4 pillars simultaneously.
Which does imply, actually, and this would make sense, is because if you want to achieve that sustained performance that you're talking about at the highest level, is nothing good or nothing great was ever achieved through easy means. You have to do the heavy lifting and the investment up front to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, you do, and also again, one of the things that you find is that there is that notion of a kind of hard work ethic that permeates across all of them. I love some of the work that the likes of Carol Dweck has done in terms of growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Sure.
And she talks a lot about people with a growth mindset recognize hard work as the currency of success. You don't get good at something unless you kind of you work deliberately at it and at a level of commitment to it that is going to help you get really kind of master it. So sure. It's exactly the same in terms of organizational performance. Enduring performance advantage, in our opinion, is organizational in nature, but that requires a bit of thought and a lot of hard work, and a lot of alignment, and you don't get there without that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian, before I kind of come on to my last 2 questions, is there anything that you want to kind of highlight from the book that you think we've missed out that you want to mention, or am I okay to go on to ask you my last 2 questions?
No, I think you can fire away. I think we've covered a lot of ground there, actually.
Perfect. So here's my penultimate question that I've been asking for the last sort of year to people as almost like a piece of ongoing market research for myself, and because it's based on the book that I published last year in April called How to Wow. Now, what I've been doing is asking people, so what is wow service or experience to them? So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Okay.
Well, so I came across tons of examples of this as we studied each of the case studies. So I'm going to give you one that's a personal favorite of mine, which when you think about it, it's common sense, but it's not applied in a very common way. So one of the case studies was with the St. Louis Cardinals, the baseball organization.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued, as much as the performance on the field is very good, that as a business organization, it's an incredibly well-run organization itself.
Uh-huh.
One of the nights I was there, it was game night, and I attended a meeting of the ushers. Now, the ushers are the people who effectively stand in the stadium and direct you to your seat.
Right.
Okay, that's their job. And so for 15 minutes before the gates open, the ushers have a briefing meeting. And I expected the briefing meeting to be all about health and safety and what to do and not to do and all that.
Yeah.
Instead, the conversation was very much about the game tonight, who we're playing, what our lineup is going to be, how the game might go tactically, etc.
Yeah.
And I thought that's quite intriguing. And so I asked them at the end of the meeting, the guy who was running the meeting, is that normal? Do you normally do that? And he said, yes, we do. And I kind of said, why? He said, follow one of the ushers and you'll find out.
Right.
So I was assigned to one of the ushers. And so the stadium is now open. The fans are walking in the door. And the usher is taking the ticket. And so that individual usher might have 30 to 60 seconds with you as he or she escorts you to your seat. And in that 30 or 60 seconds, he's saying, hey, we were just talking today about today's game. Do you know one of our players is injured, and he's been replaced by so-and-so, and tactically, you know, we're 4 games ahead of them in the league at the moment, and their pitcher's in not great form, so we're going to be quite aggressive against that pitcher, and so it'd be great if you got involved, if we got ahead of the count and added a bit more pressure onto the pitcher.
Right.
And then it clicked with me. That's exactly why they have that conversation with the ushers beforehand, because it changes the dynamic of the nature of the relationship that they can have with the fans when they come into the stadium.
Yeah.
And so you talk to the fans in the stadium and you ask them, why do you come to Bush Stadium instead of going somewhere else? And they go, well, obviously I love the Cardinals, but also it's because it's just different. I have a different experience here than what I have in other places, and I feel more part of it, and can't quite put my finger on it, but there's, you know, something about here that's a little bit different. And it all stems from that notion of enabling people, engaging with people so that they can perform their job, their role, their function in a better way.
Right.
In this case, it's the ushers who are the frontline staff who are meeting the fans as they come in and out of the stadium.
Yeah.
But that for me is an example of a kind of, you know, one of those wow service moments that is really simple, but brilliantly executed and highly effective in terms of delivering the type of experience that they want those fans to enjoy.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, that's a brilliant story. It reminds me of, you know, if you go to a football or soccer game and they talk about, oh, the crowd was the 12th man.
Yeah,
and it's almost a bit like, but sometimes that's left to happenstance,
correct,
on the game. But actually, what they're doing is they're designing that into the whole experience. They are, by the work of the ushers, they are making the crowd the 12th man, as it were.
That's exactly the point. Exactly the point. They don't leave it to chance. They make sure it happens.
That's fantastic. What a great story. And that brings me to my last kind of question, which I think you've already answered, but I'm going to ask it to you again. Brian, is there anything that you'd like to shamelessly plug?
Well, obviously, I'll shamelessly plug the book itself. So the book is called Powerhouse. To get a bit more detail around the book itself, go to the website of the book, theperformancepowerhouse.com.
Okay.
Alternatively, if you want to engage our services as consultants, so if you're looking to drive high performance in your organization and you're looking for people to help you with that journey, then get in touch with us through either through the book website or through catinospartners.com. You'll find us there, and reach out and talk to us about that, and we'd love to help.
So, Brian, thank you, and that's brilliant. I love the stories. I love the book. I think it's there's some fantastic kind of exemplars there, but hugely diverse, set of inspiration for lots of other organisations. But I just want to say, first of all, congratulations on the book. I hope it does really, really well. I really enjoyed it. I'll keep dipping in and out of it and stealing lots of the stories as well, I think. Yeah. But I just want to also say thank you for your time today and sharing your insight and your experience. That's been brilliant.
No, it's great. I really appreciate it, and likewise, congratulations on yours, because I got a copy after I met you, and I haven't finished it in yet, but I'm really enjoying it. So no, it's excellent work.
Thank you.